Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
A retired High Court judge has been appointed to lead the inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire. And he's making the headlines already because of what the Times newspaper today calls his controversial record in housing cases, or in one housing case anyway. We'll bring you some facts about him in a moment. Yesterday, you might remember in our programme in North Kensington, some Grenfell Tower survivors and residents talked about their faith in the forthcoming inquiry and what needed to be changed when it comes to listening to their views.
You talk about trust and trying to rebuild trust and the importance of that. These people wrote to the Prime Minister the day before yesterday to make requests about the public inquiry. The Prime Minister didn't reply to that letter. The Prime Minister went to the Daily Telegraph and told the Daily Telegraph she wasn't going to uphold one of the requests in that letter. So how can you talk about trust being rebuilt?
We're talking about Britain here. Yeah. We're talking about a powerful country here. We're talking about law. Process has to be changed right now. Procedure has to be changed right now.
This is not going to take a few shows. This is not going to take a few meetings. This is years of work. This is years of work.
The Housing Minister, I'm told, is here, and his name is Alok Sharma, and he has agreed to be with us today after pressure from residents. So I know you have questions for him. I think he's here. Alok Sharma, hello. Hi, I'm Victoria. Take a seat. Thank you very much for giving us your time today.
We need from you guys, please, stop hiding. Stop hiding things for us. It's international now. Stop hiding. I want everything on the table, black and white.
When we're talking about this public inquiry, there's moves already being made. This public inquiry has already started, but we haven't even been given the opportunity to come together as one yet. We need and demand to be part of every single decision made in that public inquiry. Needs to come through everyone here.
By the way, it's worth letting you know that the Housing Minister who you saw there, who was sent to our programme after an earlier decision in the morning that no one was going to be available from the government, Alok Sharma, the Housing Minister, spent many hours talking to residents in private after our programme came off air. So, what do we know about the retired judge who's been chosen to lead the public inquiry into the Grenfell fire? Sir Martin Moore-Bick is 70. He was born in Wales. He went to Cambridge University. He specialised in commercial law before spending more than 20 years as a judge at the High Court and the Court of Appeal. Controversially, he ruled in favour of Westminster Council, allowing them to rehouse a single mother of 5 living with HIV and diabetes some 50 miles away near Milton Keynes. At the time, her lawyer described that decision as social cleansing of the poor. The ruling was later overturned by the Supreme Court. He also ruled that a Chinese-born man who tied up and robbed 2 women in their home could be deported, even though he had British-born children. Sir Martin is married with 4 children of his own. His brother is retired Army General John Moore-Bick. Who's Who lists his interests as early music, gardening and reading. Our legal expert, Clive Coleman, explained the significance of his appointment.
He has a kind of classic CV of a successful Court of Appeal judge. He was called to the bar in 1986. He served as a Deputy High Court judge. He was then a High Court judge. He served mainly on the commercial court, which meant he was dealing with technical engineering type of evidence in many cases, which of course is a qualification for Grenfell. He was appointed to the Court of Appeal in 2005. He retired last year. For the last 2 years of that period, he was Vice President of the Court of Appeal's Civil Division. He's married. He has children. He's an establishment figure. His brother is a retired general.
And why is he described in one newspaper today as controversial?
OK, well, if you consider that he went to the Court of Appeal in 2005 and he left last year, so he was there for 11 years or so. This morning in the newspapers, one of his cases, one of his decisions has been picked up, and it's a case in 2014 where he oversaw a case in which he ruled that a London tenant, a woman who lived in Westminster, she was a single mother, she had 5 children, and she was rehoused by Westminster City Council some 50 miles away in Bletchley, near Milton Keynes in Buckinghamshire. Now, she disputed that decision. She said it was unlawful. She took a judicial review. When it got to the Court of Appeal, he had to scrutinise whether the decision taken by Westminster City Council, and councils are entitled to rehouse people out of area in certain circumstances, whether that decision was lawful, and he decided that it was lawful. Now, the reason the case is being looked at as an illustration of perhaps some controversy is that, you know, some people are nodding at that as perhaps a perceived bias against vulnerable families. Everyone I've spoken to has said, look at the entire career. This is one decision. He was applying the law. But after the case, the solicitor, Jayesh Kunwadia, who works for Hodge Jones and Allen Solicitors, said this. He said the judgment could have dire consequences for vulnerable families across the country. He said it gives the green light for councils to engage in social cleansing of the poor on a mass scale. So when you have comments like that, you can see why some people would think that is a controversial judge in relation to this particular inquiry.
What about the terms of reference for this inquiry? Who decides that?
Well, the terms of reference will be decided by the government, and let me just say why I think they've picked this particular judge. First of all, as I say, he's been in the commercial court, where as a barrister he was involved in shipping cases where he would also have had to deal with really complex engineering matters, you know, why a ship sank, for instance. Now, although they are different in nature, they are similar in terms of complexity to the kind of technical engineering details. You need a judge who can get their head around that. You also need a judge who is going to be good in communicating with the families, empathetic. Dame Heather Hallett got a lot of plaudits for the way she handled the 7/7 inquiry because of her emotional intelligence, if you like, and the way she dealt very sensitively with the issues and with the families. And you need that as well. I've spoken to friends, lawyers who know Martin Morbick, who said that he is a man of unfailing courtesy who will listen. He can be persuaded. He will change his mind. If persuasive argument and evidence means that a position he's taken is the wrong position, he will change his position.
We can speak now to Joe Morn QC, a barrister and director of the Good Law Project. They have been providing some free legal support for people in North Kensington. Hello to you, Mr Morn. Have you heard of Sir Martin Morbick, and if you haven't, does it matter?
It doesn't matter. You know, the government is fishing here in a very, very shallow pool of candidates. They are all establishment figures. They are all white. They all come from very privileged backgrounds. Judicial diversity is fundamentally non-existent. So what the government has to do in circumstances like this is it has to communicate to victims at Grenfell why it's chosen this particular person. You know, if you're a victim, what you want is you want to hear from the government why, what's the question that they've asked that has Sir Martin as the answer. I don't really think you can take too much from focusing on particular decisions that a judge has made, looked at in isolation. We don't know about other cases that Sir Martin may have decided that were favourable to those who would seek rehousing. So I'm a little distracted. There's a fire alarm.
Yes, I can hear that as well. Where are you now?
I'm sitting in a studio at Millbank.
OK. If you want to leave, Joe, then please do.
It may have stopped.
OK, I'm told it's only a practice, but I appreciate your concern. OK. On our programme yesterday, we heard a lot about trust, and actually a lot about distrust, a lack of faith, a lack of trust in the establishment, from politicians right through. Yeah. Some kind of government statement then, which is what you've just suggested, would seem to be the least that should be done here to explain this decision.
I think that's right. I think what people want is to be heard. You heard that from your viewers will have heard that from the clips that were played just before I came on air. People want to feel that they're involved in the process. So is there going to be discussion with Grenfell community leaders about the nature of the terms of reference? Are residents of Grenfell Tower, family members of victims of the disaster, going to be consulted on the choice of barrister who represents families and victims in the inquiry? Is government really going to think about the difficulties that families at Grenfell face in trusting an establishment that we know has let them down? That's fundamentally the problem, and what you've got to hope is that government really, really focuses on that, because these inquiries that have the capacity to heal also have the capacity to exacerbate harm and distrust, and I desperately hope that that is not what happens here.
Briefly, tell us about some of the, obviously without giving private details, but some of the areas that you're helping local people with.
Well, the particular issue that I've been focused on is helping, in particular, Muslim families recover the bodies of family members who died in the tragedy. And the police have been conducting quite properly a very careful and methodical exercise in trying to establish exactly what happened. But particularly if you're a Muslim family or if you're a Jewish family, it's very, very important that you get the remains back quickly. And I've not always been convinced that the police have been holding those two issues in proper balance. And so certainly over the weekend I threatened the Metropolitan Police with court proceedings, and that caused the police to release a body that they had previously said was not available on the Monday, and I'm now working with another family in relation to a very, very similar case.
Right. So that threat of court proceedings led to the outcome that your family needed?
That's certainly what the family think, and for what it's worth, it's what I think as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Joe Morn, QC, who is a barrister and director of the Good Law Project. And I think it has just been confirmed. Bear with me, I'm just getting on my tablet. Here it is, that Sir Martin Morbick is going to lead this public inquiry. Theresa May, in fact, has just confirmed it. The public inquiry into the Grenfell Tower disaster will be led by retired Court of Appeal Judge Sir Martin Morbick, adding, "We must get to the truth about what happened. No stone will be left unturned by this inquiry." So that is what Theresa May, the Prime Minister, says. We must get to the truth about what happened. No stone will be left unturned by this inquiry, as she confirms the appointment of the retired Court of Appeal Judge Sir Martin Morbick to lead this investigation.
Now, I've been telling you today that Sir Martin Morbick has been the newly appointed head of the public inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire, and he has been speaking this lunchtime, saying he is doubtful that the process will be as wide-ranging as some residents hope.
I do want to emphasise that the inquiry is going to be independent, but it's essential that we hear from anyone who has information that might have a bearing on the task that I have to perform. And from my brief meetings with residents of the tower and local people, it's quite clear that many of them will have evidence to give that will be of great value to the inquiry. So yes, we can take account of their views and what they have to say.
They've also said they want you to consider the societal issues around this fire, the society in this area not being listened to. That's quite a broad point. Does that enter into your thinking on what you can look at?
Well, I've been asked to undertake this inquiry on the basis that it would be pretty well limited to the problems surrounding the start of the fire and its rapid development in order to make recommendations as to how this sort of thing can be prevented in the future. Now, I'm well aware that the residents and the local people want a much broader investigation, and I can fully understand why they would want that. Whether my inquiry is the right way in which to achieve that, I'm more doubtful, and I'll give that some thought and in due course make a recommendation. But there may be other ways in which that desire for an investigation can be satisfied, otherwise than through the work that I'm going to do.
So you may not be able to give them the very wide inquiry they appear to be looking for?
Maybe not.
You have got to produce an interim report in the Prime Minister's terms as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Given that the police don't even know at this stage how many people died in this fire, how challenging is that going to be?
I think it could be very challenging for two reasons. One is that we don't yet know exactly how much material there will be to collect. I suspect quite a lot, and it will have to be digested so that we can make come to sound conclusions, albeit as quickly as we can. I think it's impossible at the moment to say how long that's going to take. I have on other occasions said a matter of months. Some people have talked about 2 or 3 months. I don't think that's realistic. On the other hand, I would be very disappointed if we couldn't get a preliminary report out in under a year. But I'd rather not say with any greater precision now where it's likely to be.
And can you say with any precision what the content of that interim report might be, what questions you're able to answer in the early stages?
Well, I would hope to be able to answer the basic factual questions, such as how did the fire start, how did it spread, how was it enabled to engulf the whole of the building at such speed, and also questions such as what internal precautions there were, what steps are available for alerting residents and for allowing them to escape.
Just turning to the question of whether you are the man for this job, you'll have seen some coverage this morning of a housing decision you made in the appeal court, I think, yes, 2 years ago, and the word controversial connected, yes, to that decision. Is that a fair description of you as the man chosen to lead this, this public inquiry?
I was rather surprised to see myself described as controversial. That the case that you describe is one of many that I've decided over my time as a judge. I mean, I've been a judge for over 20 years, and particularly as a judge in the Court of Appeal, one deals with an enormous range of work, much of which involves local government or central government, and one simply reaches the conclusion that you think is right, applying the law as you see it, and that is the work of a judge. And you can't pretend that you get every case right, at least not in the eyes of the Supreme Court.
So in no sense...
Well, that was Sir Martin Morbick giving us the first insight yet into how he views the upcoming investigation into the Grenfell Tower fire.
It's only a few hours since Theresa May named the judge who will chair the Grenfell Tower inquiry. And already Sir Martin Morbick is facing questions about whether his brief is wide-ranging enough. Sir Martin promised a vigorous inquiry into what caused the fire and how it spread so quickly with such fatal consequences. But many local residents, some of whom met the judge this afternoon, say they want to know who should be responsible for the disaster. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports.
Away from the debate about the number of deaths and the risk from cladding, dozens of families are mourning. Relatives of Tony Disson laid him to rest today, close to the tower. And this is the man facing the task of explaining their deaths, facing the cameras for the first time.
I've never seen anything like that building, which is now completely gutted so that you can see through it in many places. I'm absolutely determined that this inquiry will be open and full, and will cover all the ground so that we reach conclusions that are reliable and can prevent anything like this happening again. Well, I've had a brief conversation.
He spent several hours listening to the views of survivors and local people, but already he and they appear to have different views of the inquiry's aims.
He may certainly get to the bottom of, what caused the fire to spread so quickly. Whether he will get to the bottom of who is responsible for causing the fire in the first place is a different matter, and that's the one that's really concerning residents at present.
We want a wider inquiry, the one that would include the issues that were raised before. So basically the attitude towards people. We want to make sure that people will be listened, that our voices won't be ignored. That's the priority.
There's a feeling around the tower that he should examine whether warnings about fire safety were ignored because the community had no voice.
Whether my inquiry is the right way in which to achieve that, I'm more doubtful. And I'll give that some thought and in due course make a recommendation. But there may be other ways in which that desire for an investigation can be satisfied, otherwise than through the work that I'm going to do.
So you may not be able to give them the very wide inquiry they appear to be looking for?
Maybe not.
People here are desperate for answers. The Prime Minister said she would like an interim report within months. Today the judge said that could include details of how the fire started, why it spread so fast and the response. But he said even that could take up to a year. After all, the remit of the inquiry still has to be decided by the government. The cause of the fire will clearly be a core topic, but the Prime Minister's also talked about examining the wider issue of tower block safety, and the pressure for a deeper look at social and political causes is unlikely to go away. The chairman, Sir Martin Moore-Bick, was born in Wales and went to Christ's College, Cambridge, before becoming a barrister. He was appointed to the High Court as a judge in 1995, hearing commercial cases, and to the Court of Appeal, the second highest court in England and Wales, in 2005. There, he rejected a family's legal attempts to prevent Westminster Council moving them out of London. The Supreme Court overturned the ruling. That decision meant today he was labelled a controversial choice for the Grenfell Inquiry. And he knows that revealing the truth about Britain's worst fire in modern history will be a difficult and sensitive task, carried out in the full glare of public attention. It could take him years.
And Tom's with me now. Tom, as you were suggesting there in your report, there are already tensions about what this inquiry should do.
A little, I think, George, yes. I mean, he is well regarded in the legal profession as somebody who's very competent and a fast worker, importantly. He seems to be somebody who comes partly from a technical background. He's worked on shipping cases, for example, and disasters at sea. But as you saw there, many people in that area feel that the roots of this fire really lie in the way society deals with or regards people who live in social housing. So there's a clear mismatch there. They also want the guilty named, and he would say, and I think is the case, that is the role of the police investigation that's ongoing. And actually the public inquiry has to take second place to the police investigation. But I think what all this demonstrates is that if he doesn't keep the residents and the victims of the fire on side, really behind the inquiry, then it could run into trouble. And the long-running public inquiry into child sexual abuse shows that, George, is a risk.
All right, Tom, thanks very much. Thank you.
Now, the retired appeal court judge who's leading the investigation into the Grenfell Tower fire has admitted the scope may not be broad enough to satisfy everyone. Sir Martin Moore-Bick visited the site of the disaster today to meet some of the survivors, saying he hoped an interim report could be published within a year. But local campaigners say they want the inquiry to include why the fire started in the first place and whether residents' concerns were ignored. Our social affairs editor, Jackie Long, reports.
Paying his respects, the man charged with heading the public inquiry into the Grenfell fire came to see for himself the devastation which has been caused. People here want him to provide answers. And first, this question: just who is he? This is the latest in a long line of high-profile roles for Sir Martin. Until retiring in December, he was Lord Justice of Appeal. He originally specialised in commercial law, after being called to the bar in 1969. He was appointed to the High Court in 1995, for which he eventually received a knighthood. But one of his most controversial cases saw him rule in favour of Westminster Council in 2014, after they rehoused a tenant 50 miles away in Milton Keynes, a decision overturned by the Supreme Court the following year. He met some of the survivors for 3 hours at St Clement's Church this morning, and speaking afterwards, he accepted from the outset his inquiry might disappoint.
I'm well aware that the residents and the local people want a much broader investigation, and I can fully understand why they would want that. Whether my inquiry is the right way in which to achieve that, I'm more doubtful.
Sir Martin said his inquiry would answer basic factual questions. How did the fire start? How did it spread so quickly? What internal safety measures were in the flats to help residents escape? But is this the inquiry residents were led to believe they would get?
Mr. Speaker, for too long residents have been overlooked and ignored. Will you ensure they are involved in every step of this process? No stone will be left unturned in this inquiry, and for any guilty parties there will be nowhere to hide.
It's not just the remit of the inquiry which is causing anger, though. Pleas from survivors to be consulted over who should head it were ignored.
Sir Martin, is this workable, given many residents seem very unhappy about your appointment?
Well, I've had a brief conversation with some of the residents. I'm not sure they're as unhappy as you may think, but that'll be for them to say.
Sid Ali, who escaped from the 15th floor, was happy to listen to Sir Martin, but will reserve judgment until he sees what he will actually do.
We've been through a lot for 2 weeks, and we have been neglected, and we have lost the trust. All what happened to us after the fire. We're not giving up. We have faith to each other. I can't have faith to no one.
Do you have faith in him? Do you have faith in the inquiry, though?
To be honest with you, I can't. My personal feeling, I can't have faith in anyone until I see it formal in paper.
Did you find him sympathetic today?
No. I will wait. I will wait for each word has been said to me. I will wait because I need to see it formally.
This is just the first day of the judge's new role as chair of the inquiry, and the scale of the task he faces is already becoming clear. Survivors are divided over his appointment. People already making comparisons with the much-troubled child sex abuse inquiry, with some unhappy about who's been appointed and how it was done.
A lot of the residents didn't know about this judge being here.
This meeting that's taken place this morning, a lot of people didn't know about it. I didn't know about it.
Corinne Jones was home with her children on the 17th floor when her 9-year-old son woke her to tell her there was a fire, saving the family's life. The couple say the judge's involvement in a case rehousing a mother 50 miles from her home tells them he isn't the man for this job.
I was in a similar situation with Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea last year this time. 4.5 years they moved me to the outskirts of London. It was the worst 4.5 years of me and my partner and our children's life, and if this judge didn't have any sympathy for her, I don't know how it's going to go with this whole tower and this building.
I agree. I have no faith in this judge. Just from he doesn't seem to have empathy. Just from his previous dealings with people in social housing.
It's been a familiar theme. Families and bereaved feeling a lack of trust, of being disrespected. Tonight, another blow. The news that a man has been arrested for pretending to have lost his wife and child in the fire.
Well, Kensington and Chelsea Council met for the first time tonight since the disaster. There was some confusion as journalists were allowed in, but then the meeting was adjourned. Our correspondent Paul McNamara is there. Paul, what happened?
Well, Chris, I mean, this was effectively more of a glorified press conference than an actual cabinet meeting, or less kindly as one rival Labour councillor put it, an utter fiasco. So during the day, we were told that press wouldn't be allowed and local residents wouldn't be allowed to attend. Then 2 minutes before in fact 2 minutes after the meeting started, we were told that journalists would be able to attend. The reason that the council gave throughout the day was they were worried about anger and about violence. In fact, it wasn't anger and violence from the residents they needed to be concerned about. It was really anger from fellow councillors. What effectively ended up happening was that the council leader, Nicholas Paget-Brown, gave a briefing of what's happened so far, that £1.6 million has been distributed to residents, and he called for a scrutiny committee. But then that's where this evening ended. He said he had taken legal advice and that to continue any more in the public would prejudice an independent judge-led inquiry. That was met with a lot of anger in the room. The Labour leader Robert Atkinson said this is an absolute fiasco and this is why I'm calling for your resignation.
We're now joined by Joe Delaney of the Grenfell Action Group, who met the judge leading the public inquiry earlier today, Conservative Andrew Boff, who is Deputy Chair of the Housing Committee on the London Assembly, and local resident Samia Badani. Joe Delaney, you've got your public inquiry now and you've got a chair of it. Does that in any way bring any comfort?
Well, we knew that we were going to get a public inquiry. What we were told was we would have input on who the judge would be. What we were told was we would have input on the remit. I met with Sir Martin Morbick this morning. He acknowledged to us that he sees the eventual remit that he will be outlined to be far narrower than anything that any of us want. Personally, I think his investigation and inquiry should be a smaller part of a bigger inquiry, ideally one led by a criminal barrister, because I think it needs that level of scrutiny and interrogation.
It seems to suggest, Samir, that in fact there's very little consultation with you, the survivors, and local residents. than we're led to believe.
Absolutely, it's rather disappointing. It seems almost like a breakdown in communications. We're quite concerned that there are many questions unanswered. For example, the lack of engagement. It seems to me that doesn't work. The way the TMO engage with us residents doesn't work. The way they
TMO being
the tenant management organisation, and we welcome this inquiry. But in the interim, we need the situation to be reviewed, so we don't have any other issues, because we do in our building have issues with fire safety. This is not satisfactory to us.
It's interesting because, Andrew Boff, you are a strategic authority at the London Assembly, and I'm just wondering how this situation, what you make of this situation.
Well, I think the priority, as far as we're concerned, as Londoners and as the representative body of Londoners, is the residents and the victims get some kind of justice, and they get the inquiry that they need and that they want. And I'm no expert on how public inquiries are restricted. There are certain legal reasons they must be restricted in a certain way, but we must leave no area of questioning unanswered. There's a number of different inquiries taking place. The fire service are having inquiry, the police, the DCLG are having an inquiry, and if necessary, if the residents, I think, if you feel that there are more questions to be answered, you need some kind of independent report, I think the London Assembly, we could probably come forward and address some of those concerns.
Well, that's a rather interesting offer, isn't it? Maybe you can exchange contacts.
You will promise us funding so that we can commission our own inquiry.
As one member of the London Assembly, I wanted some engagement with the residents.
But you see, you have to appreciate that we feel we're let down too often.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've been told recently to rely on the reports from Public Health England about the air quality in the area. I just found out last night that the monitoring equipment they're using is 3/4 of a mile away at St Charles Sixth Form College, and we've been told that it will be moved in closer to the area on Sunday. That's almost 3 weeks after the disaster.
The reason I'm not going to promise to you the exact remit is because I don't want to let you down again. I don't want to give you promises that we're not going to keep. But what I can guarantee is that certainly as London politicians, we're going to carry on this dialogue. But we're going to make sure we get the inquiry and answers that you deserve.
Should the London Assembly not perhaps take over the powers of Kensington and Chelsea? I mean, this meeting tonight was ridiculous. I mean, they met, and then because the press were let in, they closed down.
There's so many questions to be answered about the way in which Kensington and Chelsea Council responded to this disaster. And I know that there's an enormous amount of frustration, obviously, from the residents and the victims, but also councillors as well.
But does the London Assembly see it as part of their own remit to try and ensure that these people do get what they need?
As a London Assembly with 700 similar tower blocks in London, 700 of these similar ones, we have to get to the bottom of this. We can't see this happen again anywhere.
Right.
I think we would welcome any involvement. What would help would be for you to sit with us and agree on the terms of references and what is it that you can investigate, because we have so many questions. And we would welcome your review in parallel to the public inquiry. You need to engage with us so we can agree on what your remit could be.
So many people wonder what the London Assembly is about, and this is what the London Assembly is.
It's not often you find yourself in a studio and you're being made an offer by an authority that hasn't really yet been in play.
Well, I was in a studio yesterday with Sharma, can't remember, Alok Sharma, the Conservative MP, and he made several offers yesterday. You know, whether they'll be fulfilled is a different matter. I mean, the basic ones, the most important people are the survivors of that tower block, OK? Then I would consider the second most important to be people like myself who've been evacuated. And then third is the wider community. Now, we all have issues that are identical, and then at times we have issues that are unique. And frankly, none of us are being listened to. Promises are being made and they're rarely kept, or they're changed within, you know, an hour of them being made.
Well, we will try to continue to pursue these things, but thank you very warmly for coming in, Andrew Boff, and thank you both, Sonia and Joe.
Everybody thinks we need to learn the lessons from the Grenfell Tower fire, and responsibility for drawing up the right lessons rests primarily on the shoulders of one man, Sir Martin Moore-Bick, a 70-year-old former commercial lawyer and appeal court judge. He went to the site of the fire today and met residents, which sounds fine, but, and it is a big one, he then downplayed expectations of what his inquiry might cover and how quickly it could report.
Now, I'm well aware that the residents and the local people want a much broader investigation, and I can fully understand why they would want that. Whether my inquiry is the right way in which to achieve that, I'm more doubtful, and I'll give that some thought and in due course make a recommendation. But there may be other ways in which that desire for an investigation can be satisfied, otherwise than through the work that I'm going to do.
Well, after the inadequacy of the early response to the fire and, of course, those problems in the child abuse inquiry, it is going to be pretty important for this one to have the confidence of the survivors of the fire and the families of the deceased. And they do not merely want another review of cladding. They think they were ignored when they were warning of problems. For them, this is a case of the authorities on trial. For them, those authorities give the impression of running away from questions. To make that point, tonight, a meeting of the Cabinet of the Kensington and Chelsea Council collapsed in disarray as the leader left with his colleagues after the press were allowed in after having secured an injunction to watch the proceedings. Well, that was nothing whatsoever to do with the new inquiry chair, but has Sir Martin Moore-Bick lost the confidence of the locals already? With me now are two residents of the estate neighbouring the Grenfell Tower, Thomasina Hessel and Joe Delaney, who've been evacuated from their homes. We're also joined by the former Lord Chancellor, Charlie Faulkner. Welcome all. Joe, I know you were in the meeting with the judge today.
Yeah, he held a few. I was in the 10 a.m. one. I think it was the first he held.
And what was your impression?
He's a nice guy, but he didn't inspire any confidence, to be honest. I was a bit sceptical when his name was leaked in the press and the media last night, and so I was doing some research on him last night. The cases that he was involved in didn't inspire confidence in me either.
But you met him, and I mean, he knew he had a job to sell himself to you to some extent, I'm sure. What did he say that gave you reservation, or what did he say that...
For a start, he seemed to already be saying that the terms of the inquiry would be extremely narrow, and yet supposedly they haven't been decided or solidified yet. So that gave us a big concern. His background gave me a concern. Insurance and commercial law, you know, that doesn't inspire confidence in me at all.
OK. Thomasina, what are the questions you think an inquiry needs to look at that you fear may be brushed aside or overlooked?
Well, it seems that this judge is giving us already the impression that it's going to be just about what started the fire and what caused it. But we want to know what led to it as well. So, you know, the circumstances and political things that allowed the cladding to go on, what regulations allowed...
So it's less about the cladding being wrong, but whose job it was to get the cladding right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And do you fear that... I mean, what is the fear here? That really people are interested in a cover-up, or that people are just... Is that your fear,
yes,
Joe, really?
It's not just my fear, it's the fear of everyone. I mean, I'm not normally a conspiracy theorist, but frankly, the way that the authorities have behaved since the beginning of this tragedy has frankly appalled me, and it's appalled my neighbours.
Yeah, because...
You know, there was absolutely no response on the ground on the first night. Right. The fire crews couldn't get to the location. The fire crews couldn't put out the fire because they didn't have the correct equipment. Some of them then ran into the tower block without helmets or gas masks on. They were so keen to get people out. You know, the first thing that went up was the emergency staircase because the gas pipes had been installed up it. It's a litany of failures, and it's gone back several years.
Yeah, I mean, we do feel that, you know, there has been a managed decline, and there was an application for demolition of the tower in 2014. You know, so we do feel that they wanted us out anyway. So
all of that should be in the purview of the inquiry.
It just means that it seems that they were negligent because they didn't want us there anyway.
Although they had just renovated. I mean, they had renovated the tower.
Yeah, but that's because it was an eyesore to the, you know, to the rich people in the area.
Look, Charlie Faulkner, there's an enormous amount of suspicion, obviously. Trust is the most important thing. What was your impression when the judge came out and said, I'm going to probably disappoint the local residents by the scope of my inquiry?
Well, I mean, I'm worried by that, and actually both what Joe is saying and what Thomasina is saying about what the scope of the inquiry should be seems to me to be absolutely right. It can't be, to use your language, just a review of the cladding. It's got to go right back to explain how we ended up both with some regulations that don't appear to be effective And also, even if the regulations were effective, I don't know whether they were or they weren't, how are they not enforced? Now, if the terms of reference don't allow for the legitimate questions that Thomasina has raised about the build-up over time to the situation, and the legitimate questions that Joe has raised about how did the emergency services prove to be so ill-equipped to deal with the fire once it had, then I would agree with both of them that it'd be. But I'm not.
The terms of reference haven't been set, Rex.
Precisely, and they're right. They're right in the way they're putting it. I thought the issue was about, you know, how, you know, do you go right back into what's the right political system, which obviously the judge can't deal with. But both the areas that Joe and Thomasina are dealing with are the right areas to focus on. But just on the judge, Sir Martin Moore-Bick, I understand what Joe is saying about what he's got an insurance and a maritime background. I didn't know him personally, but I've worked with him over 30 years. He is a guy who will be able to deal with what will inevitably be a whole range of vested interests, like national government, like the local authority, trying to make it as complicated as possible. You need somebody who's both sympathetic and gets the trust of the Grenfell Tower people, but also is able to cut through it.
Thomasina.
This is the problem I'm facing. So we've put out a statement to Theresa May to consult us with the appointment of the judge. She's actually not consulted us. She hasn't responded to us, and she's done it. Now, it looks like it's a foregone conclusion that she's done there.
So that is very interesting. And what's the normal procedure here? Is there some legal principle that you don't talk to victims in the picking of the judge? Because that's
the normal principle about the appointment of a judge in a court case is you can't, as it were, negotiate with the parties as to who's to be there. And I understand what you're saying. This is not a court case. Thomasina is right, but it's one where it's an inquiry with a judge appointed in effect by the Lord Chief Justice. If there is a problem with the judge, then I think he should be replaced. But my own view would be you've got the broad scope right. If that's not reflected in the terms of reference, there'll be a problem. But give Sir Martin Moore-Bick a chance.
I met him this morning.
Yeah.
These were the concerns that were raised. He said that he didn't feel that they could be covered. Why on earth is that meant to inspire confidence in anyone?
I don't know whether...
There was a room of 10 residents. He didn't sell himself to a single one of us. I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt at the time, but the more that I found out, the less willing I'm able. And I think really the nail in his coffin has been, was his decision in the Westminster case, where he sent that poor family to Milton
But did you go in open-minded? Put aside the history of his cases, because you don't know what the legalities of the case were. So did you go in open-minded?
I went in the way that anyone would go in. When I had some questions I expected honest answers to, and unfortunately the answers, I certainly believe they were honest, but I don't believe they were satisfactory.
Well, I mean, I hear and I understand what you're saying. I'm going to ask you to give him a bit more of a chance, because from my experience, I mean, I can understand you'd be suspicious.
But the thing is, it's not only him that's the problem, it's Theresa May. She hasn't responded to us. It seems that she's already decided what the judge will be, and that makes us believe that the terms of reference have also been decided already.
You know, and we don't want a Taylor inquiry. Taylor inquiry, very technical, you know, ensured that football fans weren't hemmed in anymore, ensured loudspeakers were loud enough to be heard everywhere, made very sensible conclusions on a technical standpoint. Did it lead to any prosecutions?
Final word, Lord Falconer. What does he need to do?
Two things. He needs to get your confidence, and that means he's got to listen to what you're saying, and what you've said tonight, what I've heard, is reasonable about what the terms of reference would be, and then he's got to deliver quickly a good report that explains right from the beginning how this happened.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.